Hi friends, happy Friday. Today is Friday, April 10th. Oh yeah, so in one of the other books I had read to you, I mentioned that my great aunt was a Rosie the Riveter, and she was born on this day. She's gone now though, but anyway, it's day 23 of missing my kiddos. I don't like that at all. Too much. I miss you guys. And I decided to rather look at the dog than me, so that's why I've got mostly focused on her, because she's cute. Okay, we are on Henry in the Clubhouse by Beverly Cleary. Oh yeah, I like this one. Chapter 6, Henry writes a letter. Naturally, as soon as Ramona learned the secret words, she recited them every chance she got, and soon they were all over the neighborhood. They were all over Glenwood School, too. Everywhere Henry went, he heard fadatas and bee pum boom pum baz. He began to wish he had never heard that silly thing. Quite a few mothers felt this way too, and asked their children, please stop saying that thing. But the whole school went right on saying fadata, fadata, fadata. I hope you're not bothering your parents at home with that. Told you not to, remember? And all because of Ramona. Yep. Henry decided something was going to have to be done about Ramona, but what, he did not know. Say, Mom, Henry said one evening, how can I keep Ramona from being such an awful pest all the time? Oh, just don't pay any attention to her, answered Mrs. Huggins. Mom, protested Henry, you don't know Ramona. Mrs. Huggins laughed. Yes, I do. She is just a lively little girl who gets into mischief sometimes. Ignore her, and she will stop bothering you. She only wants attention. Henry could not help feeling that his mother did not understand the situation. He had ignored Ramona. That's the whole problem. He was not paying any attention to her, so he had found himself locked in a clubhouse. This was not a little mischief. It was a terrible thing to do. Surely you're smarter than a 5-year-old, remarked Mr. Huggins jokingly. Henry didn't have an answer for his father, who, after all, was safe in his office all day and did not know what a nuisance Ramona could be. Next, Henry consulted Beezus. Ramona sure causes me a lot of trouble on my route, he remarked one afternoon. Isn't there some way to get her to stop pestering me? Beezus sighed. I know. I've told Mother, and Mother has told her to behave herself, but you know how Ramona is. She never listens. I know, Henry said gloomily. Ramona was a real problem. When Mrs. Quimby persuaded her to stop doing one annoying thing, Ramona promptly thought up something entirely new but equally annoying. If only Henry could find a way to stay ahead of Ramona. One afternoon, Henry arrived at Mr. Capper's garage in plenty of time to fold his papers. He counted his stack of 43 journals, and, as long as he was early, he took time to glance through the newspaper. He looked at the headlines and read the comics section. Then a picture of a smiling lady caught his eye. It was a lady who gave people advice when they wrote to her about their problems. Because he had a problem, Henry paused to read her column. A girl who signed her letter flat broke said that her father did not give her a big enough allowance. Her father did not understand that she needed more money for school lunches, bus fare, and other things. What should she do about it? The smiling lady told her to talk it over with her father and explain to him exactly what her expenses were. The smiling lady was sure he would understand. Henry thought this over. Maybe he should write to the lady about Ramona. He could write, I have a problem. A girl in my neighborhood has a little sister who pesters me on my paper route. How can I get her to stop? Then he would sign the letter, disgusted. Henry tried to think how the lady would answer his letter. Dear Disgusted, she would say. But what would she say next? Probably she would tell him to talk his problem over with Ramona's mother and everything would be all right. Oh, no, it wouldn't, thought Henry, just as if he had really read an answer to a letter he had really written. Ramona's mother knew all about his problem and had not been able to solve it. As Beezus said, Ramona never listened very much. Henry began to fold his papers. There must be somebody Ramona would listen to. And then a picture in an advertisement gave Henry an idea. Santa Claus! Ramona might listen to Santa Claus. Henry grinned to himself. He would really fix Ramona if he waited until Christmas Eve and climbed up on the Quimby's roof and yelled down the chimney in a deep bass voice, "Ho, ho, ho, Ramona Geraldine Quimby, you stop pestering Henry Huggins on his paper route or I won't leave you any presents. Ho, ho, ho." "Ho, ho, ho," said Henry out loud, just to see how much like Santa Claus he could sound. But just then Mr. Capper came out the back door. "Who do you think you are, Santa Claus?" he asked. "No, sir." Embarrassed, Henry went on folding papers. Still, Henry was pleased with this picture of himself ho-ho-hoing down the chimney at Ramona, but unfortunately there was just one thing wrong with it. Boys were not allowed to go climbing around on their neighbors' roofs on Christmas Eve or any other time. And anyway, Ramona might not even listen to Santa Claus. Henry would not be at all surprised. Henry was zigzagging down the street on his bicycle, throwing papers to the right and to the left, when he saw Beezus and Ramona hurrying along the sidewalk. Ramona was wearing a mustache cut from brown paper and stuck to her upper lip with Scotch tape. Henry recognized this as another attempt to copy one of Sheriff Bud's disguises. "Hi, Beezus," he said. Ramona pulled at Beezus' hand. Come on! We're going to be late!" There's Ramona with her mustache. "I can't understand it," remarked Beezus. "She can't even tell time, but she always knows when it's time for the Sheriff Bud program." "Like Ribsy," said Henry. "He can't tell time either, but he always knows when it's time to meet me after school." He pedaled on down the street when suddenly a thought struck him. Sheriff Bud. Yeah. If there was anyone Ramona would listen to, it was Sheriff Bud. Henry was so excited by this inspiration, he threw a paper on the wrong porch and had to go back and get it. Of course she would listen to Sheriff Bud. But how could Henry get Sheriff Bud to tell Ramona to stop pestering him on his paper route? Write him a letter. That's what he'd do. Sheriff Bud was always waving around handfuls of letters and wishing listeners happy birthdays and hoping they would get over the measles or something. He was always pretending he could see people in the TV audience, too. Henry had never heard him tell a listener to stop pestering somebody, but there's no reason why he couldn't. It would be worth a try anyway. As soon as Henry finished his route, he went home and turned on the TV set. There was Sheriff Bud in his 10-gallon hat, real tall hat. This time he was wearing a fake nose. He held a microphone in one hand, and between commercials he was interviewing a row of children who had microphones hung around their necks. All the children said hello to many, many friends out in TV land. Henry thought it was a silly program, although he still sometimes watched the cartoons that were shown between the endless commercials. Ordinarily, when Henry wrote a letter, he used the typewriter because it was more fun than pen and ink. But today he was in too much of a hurry to hunt around and poke all those keys. He found a piece of paper and a pen, and after his address and the date, he began, "Dear Sheriff." That looked weird, so he added another F. Now it's "Dear Sheriff" with 2 R's and 2 F's. Still, that looked peculiar, so he consulted the dictionary. Then Henry tore up his letter and started over. "Dear Sheriff," he spelled it right this time, "Bud." He wrote in his best handwriting, and let me show you a picture of him. I didn't want to do it until we got to this part in the book. "I need your help. There is this girl who pesters me on my paper route. She always watches your program, so could you please tell her to stop pestering me? Her name is Ramona Geraldine Quimby. Thank you." Then he signed his name, addressed an envelope to Sheriff Bud in care of the TV station, found a stamp, and went out to mail his letter. As soon as the mailbox clanked shut, Henry knew his scheme would not work. Sheriff Bud received thousands of letters every week. He was always talking about the thousands of letters he received. He waved great handfuls of them around. Why would he pay any attention to one letter, and a pretty smudgy one at that? But, doubtful as he was, Henry had somehow hung on to the faint hope that Sheriff Bud might really read his letter and help him out. The letter would be delivered the next day, but he might not have time to read it before the program went on the air, maybe the day after. 2 days later, Henry rang the Quimby's doorbell about the same time the Sheriff Bud program was starting. "Hello, Beezus," he said when his friend opened the door. "I was wondering, how about a game of checkers before I start my route?" Beezus looked surprised. She and Henry used to play checkers often, but since he had become a paper carrier and spent so much time working on the clubhouse, he had not found time to play with her. "Why, yeah, come on in." As Henry had expected, Ramona was sitting on a hassock, which is like a little cushion, I guess, in the living room watching Sheriff Bud, who today was wearing sideburns, like the long sideburns. While Beezus got out the checker set, Henry watched the program. And I want all you little folks out in TV land to do something for old Sheriff Bud, the sheriff was saying. I want you to tell Mother right now, right this very minute, to put crispy potato chips positively guaranteed never to bend, on her shopping list. Yes, sirree, this very minute. His smile filled up the whole screen. Mother, called Ramona. Sheriff Bud says. I don't care what Sheriff Bud says, answered Mrs. Quimby from the kitchen. She sounded very cross. I can make out my own grocery list without that man's help. Beezus set up the checkerboard on the coffee table, and kneeling, she and Henry began to play. For once, Ramona did not bother them, but Henry found it difficult to think about the game and try to follow Sheriff Bud at the same time. They both stopped playing whenever a cartoon came on, but Beezus had no trouble beating him twice in succession. Once, when the sheriff waved a sheaf of letters, which means like a whole handful of letters, Henry's hopes rose, but Sheriff Bud only wished a lot of people happy birthday and told how many people had written in to say they liked Nutsies, the candy bar chock full of energy. Henry wished he had said in his letter that both he and Ramona ate Nutsies all the time, and crispy potato chips too. By the time the program had ended, Beezus had defeated Henry a third time. Naturally, Henry could not let this record stand. But I can beat you tomorrow, he volunteered. Bet you can't, said Beezus, but you can come over and try. Henry left, and by working really fast, he delivered all his papers on time. The next afternoon, he once more presented himself at the Quimbys' front door, this time to show Beezus he really could beat her at checkers. He would forget all about Sheriff Bud. It had been silly of him to think his letter would be read out of all the thousands the television station received. Beezus had the checkers waiting on the coffee table, and as usual, Ramona was sitting on the hassock watching Sheriff Bud, who was wearing a pair of false ears. His voice filled the whole living room. Ramona, turn that program down, called Mrs. Quimby from the kitchen. Ramona did not budge. This time, Henry was determined to ignore even the cartoons. Beezus made the first move with a red checker, and then Henry moved his black checker. Beezus jumped him, he jumped her, and the game was on. And now, kiddies out there in TV land, if Mother doesn't have a cupboard full of, Sheriff Bud was saying. Mrs. Quimby appeared in the living room. Ramona, turn that thing down. Or turn it off. I am sick and tired of listening to that man tell me what to buy. No! Screamed Ramona. No! I don't want to turn it off. Oh my gosh. Okay, if my kid said that, hello, turn off TV, you're done. But then turn it down, said Mrs. Quimby. Seriously? And went back into the kitchen. This time, Ramona lowered the sound of the TV slightly. Your move, Beezus reminded Henry. Henry studied the board. If he moved there, Beezus could jump him, but if he moved there, he could jump her if she moved her man in the right direction. And now for today's mail, announced Sheriff Bud. Henry couldn't help glancing at the TV set. Sheriff Bud was holding the usual handful of letters, but this time he was pointing, and I gotta move this for just a dot, pointing right at the TV audience. I gotta lean over on my dog. Ramona Geraldine Quimby. It's okay. I see you out there. I see you out there in TV land. Henry and Beezus dropped their checkers. Mrs. Quimby stepped out of the kitchen. Ramona clasped her hands together. He sees me, she said. Ramona Geraldine Quimby, said Sheriff Bud, I want you to do something that will make old Sheriff Bud very, very happy. Whatever it is, I'm not going to buy it. Mrs. Quimby sounded indignant. Ramona leaned forward, her eyes wider, her mouth open. Henry's eyes were just about as wide, and his mouth was open too. Sheriff Bud sounded as if he and Ramona were all alone. Ramona, it will make Sheriff Bud very, very happy if you stop pestering, and he stopped and squinted at the letter in his hand, Henry Huggins on his paper route. Do you promise? Oh, Sissy, she does not like to be crowded. Yes, Ramona barely whispered. Good, said Sheriff Bud. "We've got to get those papers delivered. If you stop pestering Henry on his route, you will make me just about as happy as you would if you told your mother you wanted crisp potato chips for lunch every day." And now, no one was listening to the TV set anymore. "Henry!" shrieked Beezus. "Did you hear that?" "I sure did." Henry was feeling a little bit odd himself. It had seemed as if Sheriff Bud really could see Ramona. He couldn't, of course, but honestly, Mrs. Quimby snapped off the TV set. "That man will do anything to squeeze in more commercials. Crispy potato chips, really." And here's the picture of Sheriff Bud. And then, of course, Ramona's face going, "What? He sees me." We're almost done, sister. Hang in there. Only Ramona was silent. She did not even object to her mother turning off the TV set. She turned to Henry with her eyes wide. "Do you really know Sheriff Bud?" she asked. "Well, I guess you might say he's a friend of mine," said Henry, and added to himself, "now." Then Mrs. Quimby spoke to her youngest daughter. "Ramona, have you been pestering Henry on his paper route again?" Ramona looked as if she were about to cry. I won't do it anymore," she said. "That's a good girl," said Mrs. Quimby. "Delivering papers is an important job, and you must not get in Henry's way." "I bet I know how Sheriff Bud knew about it," said Beezus with a smile. "Your move, Henry." Henry grinned as he advanced his checker. Beezus promptly jumped and captured 2 of his men. Oh well, what did he care? It was only a game. His paper route was real. Henry grimaced at Ramona, who smiled back shyly. Henry moved another checker, which Beezus captured. He didn't care. His paper route was safe from Ramona. If she pestered him again, all he had to do was say, "Remember Sheriff Bud?" Hold in, sister. And his troubles would be over. It was as easy as that. He had finally hit upon a good idea that had nothing wrong with it. Not one thing. "I won," Beezus said, triumphant. "Oh, I'll beat you in the next game," said Henry. And this time he was sure he would. That was the end of that chapter. I love that chapter. Love, love, love. I love you guys. I hope you're staying safe. Stay in. And it's officially spring break. So take a break from all of your work and just enjoy time with your family. And just be safe. Okay. I love you guys. Sophie loves you too. Bye.